our students, as they get ready to make that next step towards post-high school, they're just making much more thoughtful decisions. Their decisions aren't about, well, everybody goes to UW-Madison, so I want to go to UW-Madison. They're not about, well, this is where my parents went or where my parents want me to go. They're really thoughtfully thinking about, do I want to go to college? Is a technical school a better option for me? Would it be better to do an apprenticeship? And would it be better to go to work right away? And none of those options is frowned upon in any way, shape, or form. Everyone is about, who are you? What are you thinking about? What do you need? Why are you choosing this? What does that institution, organization have for you to really make those decisions much more thoughtfully? And we're practicing that all the time.
Hello and welcome to the Future is Clear, Teach Like It's 2045 webcast series. My name is Scott Carr from CESA 2. Today's topic area is tackling the equity gap in your career, community, and life readiness system. Joining us today is Jill Gurtner, principal at Clark Street Community School in Middleton, Wisconsin. Jill has been in education for 33 years. She started as a high school science teacher, then became an administrator in Middleton Cross Plains, and has been a leader administrator for 30 years. Since 2012, she has been the Clark Street Community School principal and has been a part of building a school that helps transform the educational process into one that ensures that every child deeply understands their personal genius and confidently understands how they can use it for the greater good. This is quite the school. I'm super excited to have you here with us today, Jill. I really want to learn more about it, especially around that career component, if we can, and community component. And I know you guys do a lot of things with that. So welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to start by just learning a little more about you, let our guests learn more about you. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you get where you're at?
So as you said, I started as a high school science teacher. I started in the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District as an associate principal at the traditional high school when I was pretty young and, kind of on fire if I was going to change the world at that point. And I have been here now for 30 years, slowly chipping away at that. In between there, I have I've been an associate principal at the high school throughout all of this, but I've also, I was the principal at we had a traditional alternative high school back when I started in the 90s, which was for students who are identified as being at risk. I have led our online programming in that time, and now am the principal at Clark Street as well.
Wow, 30 years of it as a leader, as an administrator. Now I know one of the reasons I think you and I get along so well is that my career started out in like that alternative ed type phase also. But tell us a little bit about yourself and that leadership type role. As you moved through alternative ed, we do things differently in our world. What was it like? How, what type of hurdles, barriers did you encounter, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the biggest inspiration for the model that we have at Clark Street was that experience in a school that the district with very, very good intentions, like other districts, had designed an alternative high school program. It was a very traditional at-risk program. So the students were identified as at risk, and then students who were identified as at risk could apply to be a part of this alternative high school. And in that time, there were amazing staff doing great things with kids, really building relationships, helping get kids to believe in themselves. And what was always clear was that it wasn't the students who were the source of the problem. It was a system that was not designed in a way that would maximize their strengths and would really allow them to see what incredibly talented human beings they were. They were in a system that just over and over again communicated to them that they didn't fit. And then probably the other biggest piece was the fact that what we saw for all of those students is that when we put them in settings in the community, doing work that was meaningful to them, that is when we got the best results. And so it was that inspiration to say, what if we designed a school? What if we designed a school that actually was designed in a way that fostered deep learning engagement for all students? so that
Yeah.
you didn't identify that some students can't fit the system and other students can, but you designed it in a way that really ensured that it worked for all students. So at that time, we really looked into Phil Schlechty's research
Yep.
out of Ohio State. And Phil Schlechte has those levels of engagement or participation for learners. And the bottom line of his research was, by design, the best we could get in schools as they were designed was students who were strategically compliant. So those kiddos who do what we ask them to do because they're getting what they want. They're getting, or what they believe they need. They're getting the
Yeah.
GPA, they're getting the stamp that they graduated from Middleton High School so that they can apply to go to a great college and get a great job, right? That story of we'll play the game and I'll play it better than everybody else so that I
Right.
can have that success. What Schlechty's research said was like, even those students aren't actually engaged in a way that
Right.
they need to be in order to truly learn. And so that was our inspiration of how do we redesign the whole thing? And we had very ambitious dreams. And from the beginning, so that was, we're at now in year 13, so that was 14 or 15 years ago when we were planning it. We said we've got to get rid of the Carnegie unit. We've got to get
Right.
rid of grades. We need our learning to be interdisciplinary. We need it to be driven by things that matter to the students, that are connected to the communities that they live in. And so from the beginning, that was our mission. And then to do it on a small scale and learn from it so that we
Yeah.
could share that with others who were attempting to do it. So now, fast forward 13, 14, 15 years later, there's a lot of action around this right now. There's a lot of things
Yeah.
happening in the competency-based world. Obviously, place-based and profession-based learning has become a lot of the conversation now. And so for me, what I let the fact that this discussion is really around equity. I've always been very, very passionate about the fact that in whatever we do, we can't leave behind that same group of students. It
Yeah.
has to be designed in a way that we can ensure that that group of students who historically has been underserved by our schools, and that they are the ones that we are building the structures and the systems around. And I feel like we've got lots of work to continue to do. We'll always be building and changing and growing and getting better.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, our system has stayed true to that commitment.
Yeah. Well, I love how you articulate, this journey and what you've actually lived and experienced, is just amazing. I can relate to it too. I tell my stories. I've been on a few podcasts and I tell my story about I had two older brothers that did very well in school. The middle brother was salutatorian even in high school, and I just could not connect to school. Um, so I was the bottom 25%, bottom third, right? And you speak exactly to I was that person. I just couldn't engage myself. I couldn't connect. And I even when I went to college, I really went to college to play a sport. That's what got me through it. And ended up, right, the same thing in college. And then I exited college. I'm like, now what? And I found myself then going into alternative education. And I could relate. I helped create things that, that kids could attach themselves to. And to your point, it had everything to do with community and engagement in a community and employability and giving them hope and opportunities and just that human side of it is what really propelled it, right? So we know this, we see this, we know that's really what schools should all be about, and we try, but we put so many things in our way, right? It's just right, these a lot of times they're barriers. But
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, with this, um, I want to ask this question too. Why the need? Why do you believe the need for a systems change, a large scale change for our whole school system? You've lived this. Why do you see the need for that type of change?
It was just having this conversation yesterday where the Middleton High School is going
Yeah.
through a multi-year process of really looking at grading practices and talking about how does the practices that we have related to grading and assigning grades impact engagement. And I was talking about the fact that what I've learned is that when you have your best and brightest moving through a system, playing the strategic compliance game, they
Yeah.
are not modeling the productive struggle that is necessary for learning.
Right.
And so when you have a peer culture that is built around strategic compliance, and then you're asking your striving learners to engage in productive struggle, but that's not what they see their peers doing,
Right.
they're not going to do it because that's not what the people who are making it, the people who they see as being the ones who are successful, that's not what they're doing as learners, right? And your story about being an athlete, the lucky ones find their niche in something other than being an engaged learner.
Yeah.
And they find their niche in athletics, or they find their niche in the arts, or they find their niche somewhere to help them make it through school. And Bettina Love's book about, we want to do more than survive. Like that's what so many of those students are doing is they're finding ways to make it through to graduation because we know graduation matters. And we know that having that diploma makes a huge difference in the long-term trajectory. But we're not supporting any of our learners in the most effective way and actually learning the productive struggle and learning how do I get a little bit uncomfortable in order to learn? And that's, you talked about the community and the connection and the relationships. For me, that's always been all about you have to build those strong relationships in order to make it safe enough for students to engage in productive struggle that is required for learning. And
Yeah.
so often we think that connection and community is that nice thing that some kids need. and we all need that. We all need it. And our most marginalized, our most historically struggling students are the ones who most need it from school.
Yeah.
And if we aren't providing that in school, if school is a individualistic, competitive survival mode, we aren't creating the spaces for them to really learn and grow and develop the skills that they're going to need in order to be successful, that all students need.
Yeah, yeah. I agree 100%. It's interesting you speak to that. I wrote it down, productive struggle. Um, a big part of that we look at, and there's a theory that's called apprenticeship through observation, where it's what we know, so this
Yeah,
is what we do. And
yeah,
there's concept behind it that as educators, we don't change the system because we've never had to struggle through the
yeah,
system.
yeah,
So a lot of the times, your innovative thinkers, those thought leaders that are really in radical change, are the ones that have had to struggle,
yeah,
through that system. So they want to see it a different way. So it's really, really interesting. I just love it. We could talk for days on this stuff. I think it's so relevant to where we're at in education. And I kind of joke about it myself with people, some of my friends when they're asking, well, how soon before, you're going to retire? And I'm like, I'm kind of enjoying what I'm doing. I'm finally finding my purpose a little bit. I can speak
mhm,
about what I went through, my experience for over 20 years working with just difficult kids and having, some great experiences there. That's what our system needs to be. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Clark Street Community School. I've read about it. I've come in and visited with you and talked about it. What is it that you do there, and how is it different?
yeah. So probably 3-4 years after Clark Street was created, I got connected with Education Reimagined, which is a national organization. And I feel like their 5 pillars of learner-centered design really are the best way to capture what we do here. So their first one is that it's all about learner agency. So that piece that we were talking about is like students have to learn how to engage. Like they have to learn how to, I always like to say, like, what I hope for students is that by the time they leave us, they know how to identify what they need, they know
Yes,
what their strengths are, and they know that any system they go into, they're going to be able to ask for what they need, which makes them so much more resilient and adaptable
right.
wherever they go. But they're not they're not being trained to just fit into the system. They're being trained to assess the system and then
Yeah.
ask for what they need out of it. So that idea of really helping students learn, your education's for you. Your education's
Okay.
not for the adults around you. Your education is for you. And so we're building that agency into what we do all the time. Their second pillar is that it's personalized, contextualized, and rigorous, and that idea. So I think that, for you and the work that you do, that contextualization and
Yeah.
that like find, we often are taking kids out into the community. We're bringing community partners in. They're doing projects within the community related to, ultimately related to their passions, but I think the coolest ones are the times where they stumble into something or they're introduced to something that they had no
Right.
idea that they were passionate about or that they cared about. And then that really becomes something that they can tap into. So that, that relevance, that rigor and contextualization is such a critical piece of it.
Mhm.
Related to that, is open walled. So that idea that learning is happening all the time. Schools do not have the corner on the market on learning. And
Right.
when we act like we're the place that you come to learn, like we're
Yep.
minimizing all those other amazing learning experiences that kids are having all of the time. And we're minimizing the richness of what our students can bring to us, what our communities can bring to us. Every struggle that exists in a community is an opportunity to, have a really rich learning experience. Um, Socially embedded is is the fourth pillar. So that idea that we were talking about, like how we have to teach and practice being in community together. How do we, how do I learn how to listen to your perspective and your
Yeah.
lived experience and understand that might lead you to a different understanding of the world and that has value to me and that my experience and my perspective has value to you, and how do we hold space for honoring that and resolving conflict when it arises. Those are things that we really do. And then probably the biggest piece for us that's our most different pieces that we're competency based,
Yeah.
and have been since the beginning. So we partner with the mastery transcript. Our students are creating a mastery transcript for what they will take with them to apply to colleges, or they can use it in the workforce or in internships, but really to tell their story of who they are as a learner. The other big piece of the value of competency based is that we've gotten really clear on, we want to make sure that every student leaves us proficient in reading, in writing, in research, in communication, in mathematics. Everyone needs to leave us at a level of proficiency in those areas, and everyone has the ability to keep growing and improving in all of those areas. So wherever you start at, that's great. Our process is going to be, you're going to keep working at it. You're going to keep getting feedback. You're going to keep working on improving it. And we're going to make sure that by the time you leave us, everyone's proficient. And also everyone's different, right? We're not
Right.
we're
Yeah.
not
Good
saying
point.
these are the 23.75 credits you all need to get. It's, you're all going to get to this level, and then please make yourselves uniquely you. Really tap into those talents that you have, the passions that you have, because that's where you're going to be most willing to dig in deep to the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Some great stuff. It's as you're saying this, in the work that I've been doing in the last few years here, and really networking and diving into, what should schools be, right? You just nailed it all. Um, to your point, contextualizing, in a way that students can see relevance to their process. Right now, there's a lot being said out there around cognitive dissonance, right? Where kids walk out and they say, "What the heck?
Yeah,
This isn't this. I didn't get prepared for
yeah,
this." So you've already met that in a way that you bring the relevance to it. The other part is you just naturally rattled off and talked about durable skills.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
just there are you already have been doing that, and they're already there. And the technical skill, the academic skill, you hold important. But the best thing I think of what you just talked about there is that came towards the end a little bit, right? It's not at the front end of the educational system. You're finding relationships, let them see a purpose, let them understand how to upskill, new skill, reskill, and achievement's a part of that. That's just
yeah.
super cool. I yeah, I got goosebumps a little bit there. Sorry. So do this. what does a typical day look like for a student?
Yeah. So students each day have 3 interdisciplinary seminars. So they start an
Hmm.
interdisciplinary seminar first thing in the morning. Then our second block is a combination of either a math workshop if they aren't in a seminar that includes math, they're doing a math workshop, but otherwise it's a personalized learning block. So it's things that aren't really necessarily moving students towards graduation, but might be a place for them to dabble in music. Might be a place that we've got a Dungeons and Dragons club that meets regularly. We have a chess club, so that kind of a space where kids can oftentimes students offer things. So we have a student who's really, we've had some sewing that they've done through a seminar, got excited about it and wanted to create a sewing club for other students. And then they go into advisory. So advisory meets every day. Our advisories are one adult, with up to 18 students. That group stays together for all 4 years. All of our seminars are multi-age, so 9th through 12th grade in every seminar. All of our advisories are multi-age, so that peer culture and that peer modeling is very much built into what we
Mm.
do. That it's like, we create, like, this is how we do things, and then we help bring everybody on. We have a set of student leaders who step into that role to say, I want to help kind of continue and build this culture. So that advisory, lunch break, then 2 interdisciplinary seminars in the afternoon. And our seminars are all connected deeply to the community. So we have a partnership with Taliesin. We do a seminar often on Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Lloyd Wright's life, and we go to Taliesin. They read Loving Frank, and they see where some of the book took place. Then they look at some of the architecture, and in a seminar like that, they'll be reading, they'll be looking at history, they'll be looking at architecture, so they can do some design and math thinking, and then students are creating a project that they're inspired about. So that
Mm.
might be a writing piece, but it also, we've had students who have created dresses, we've had students who have created furniture. So give them lots of agency in what they do with that learning. They also all include reading and writing. So students
Right.
are just reading and writing all of the time because that's how you engage in the material. That's how you prepare for the discussions that you're going to have with your peers. That's how they learn things that then they can share back with others. So it's just a very natural way to build in all of those, the development of academic skills.
Yeah. And I hear in there also, as a part of the literacy skills, listening and
Yeah,
communication, right?
yeah,
Listening and speaking, which, reading and writing really big, listening and being able to communicate also really big. So yeah, and I love the student agency because that choice, right, gives them a commitment, it allows them to be, emotionally invested, where then they're going to thrive. They're going to own their
yeah.
educational journey. I'm interested to learn a little bit about Clayton Christensen's work on disruptive innovation, from what I understand. Can you explain a little bit, how has this influenced, what is it, how has it influenced your educational model? Uh,
Yeah, yeah. So Clayton Christensen has a theory of the idea that kind of startups, these small organizations that oftentimes are gathering in groups. So this cuts across fields. So it's not an education specific theory, but when there's these things that start by serving underserved populations and then iterate over time. But because it's starting with a small group, you can iterate more quickly, and over time can overtake the traditional system. So the theory with education really started related to blended learning, and the idea that blended learning could create agency for learners. And I think that has been much slower to disrupt than the original people working on the theory thought it would be. I think now that we have AI in the picture, there will be an
Mhm.
interesting shift to see how fast that disrupts.
Right.
But the idea was, right, this small group of people coming together to say, we can do this better. And how do we iterate on this quickly so that we can design something that is better than what is offered?
Mm.
I think the interesting thing now, 15 years into this, is that what we're learning is the traditional education system is really, really resistant to disruption.
Yeah. Oh,
Um, and there's
yeah.
some really interesting research out there now that
Yeah.
Tom Arnett out of the Christensen Institute is doing on value networks, and some of the
Wow.
reasons behind that of like what we say this is what we want, and we know that this is what's best for learning, but it isn't what everybody knows as education, and it's not what they think they're getting.
Right.
And so
Right.
that risk of stepping over into something that's so different than what you believe about what education is, what public education looks like, I think has been a much more significant challenge than some of the early, and me included, thought it would be. I would have never imagined it could be this hard to get people to do something that, right? We have this conversation. We're like, of course, this is what every child should have. Why would
Right.
anyone want anything else for their child?
Right. It's funny. I live this day. I live this daily with the work that I'm doing
Yeah,
in a way. I
yeah,
mean, and it's layered a little bit. Our system is so dynamic. It's just so unique in regards to, and I'm sure our organization, educational system, is similar to a lot of other organizations. But yeah, the way you identify it, we can see it, but we look at ourselves and go, geez, I'm not sure. I don't know how do I do this?
yes,
So
yeah.
yeah, really, really interesting. The other thing I also am curious about is how you guys emphasize a democratic learning environment. Share some examples or talk a little bit about that first, and give us some examples as to what that is.
Yeah, yeah. So, foundationally, it's really about how do we ensure that every student, every person who's a part of our community knows that they have a voice in our community. And so we use a restorative model, which for us is much more about really a restorative culture than it is about responding to behavior incidents. Certainly, we have behavior incidents, and we
Yeah,
use a restorative approach to that. But for us, the restorative approach is really about how do we create a community in the first place.
nice.
And so circles. We often use circles, certainly in our advisories, but also just in an opening of a class, where every student in the circle is answering a question just to bring their voice into the room. So, right, it might be, what's your favorite ice cream, just to get everybody to say my name and this is what my favorite ice cream is, and to make sure that everybody is heard and
Yeah,
recognized. But then it can also be used to do a check-in on, understanding from the work that we've been doing, or creating connections to something that we're going to be learning about. When you connected to your personal story at the beginning, right? Like when we can activate that for learners of like, what's your connection to the thing that we're learning?
yeah,
So that process is just foundational to what we do. We also just really, really work to help students have the skills to ask for what they need. So rather than, and we have a good number of students who have disabilities and are served with IEPs or 504 accommodation plans. Our goal is for them to really know, like, this is who I am and this is what I need out of the system. And so we're working with them all of the time to say what's going on for you and what do you need, and to be able to ask for those things, and to create a culture in which that's normal and that's expected.
mhm,
I think is another big piece of it. And then truly that piece of like, when you're in community with other people, conflict will occur. And
right, right,
learning that we can have conflict. And if we take the time to learn from each other where the conflict came from, the resolution of the conflict can actually make us stronger as a community.
yeah,
And we often talk about how important it is to be practicing those things in schools, because so often that's not, like, people aren't living that outside of schools. And so we have to have practice in doing those things in order to, we look
yeah,
at the challenges we are all facing in our world right now. Like, those are going to require people to really learn how to listen to each other,
yeah,
to really learn how to deeply find, this is where you and I see eye to eye and where we can build from,
yeah.
rather than that, the skill that we all over practice of shouting at each other and not listening very much.
Yeah, again, all these things that you're talking about are really needed in our full educational
Yeah.
system, and how often do we see it, right? But yeah, hey, cookies and cream, and probably a second would be just chocolate. So just, you know. Um, so we know, right? You and I, a part of our when we first met, the conversation was around, you know, the real world connection around careers, really a career readiness, community readiness. But I like to add life readiness. But you know, how are you doing career readiness at Clark Street? You know, what are some examples?
Yeah, I think this is one of those, right, that it's just built into everything
Yeah,
we do. Probably first and foremost, it's about the exposure in the
yeah,
community. So we have a seminar going on right now called Clark Tank, where the first part of the seminar is students going out and meeting with small business owners and entrepreneurs in our community and learning their story and learning how did they get to doing what they're doing, and then bringing that information back for their peers, and then ultimately they are creating a product of some sort and designing a pitch, and they participate in the Madison College Pitch Contest, and really get that experience and the knowledge of all of the possibilities. That piece of you mentioned the speaking and presentation and listening. We whenever possible, are working to have students share their work publicly. And in order to do that, in all of our work, students are going through processes of feedback and revision. And so really helping students learn, I don't care where you go after high school, if
right.
you are willing to seek and receive feedback on your work will be better.
Yeah,
And that's a like kids struggle to do that in many traditional settings, and
yeah,
yet it is such a critical skill. Like, be willing enough to get vulnerable to share your work, put it out there, have people give you feedback on it, and revise it. But also, I love the stories when kids are like, yeah, somebody suggested I did this, but I really liked it this way, and so I
right.
kept it. Right, even that
Yeah.
decision making process of,
Mhm.
like, you gave me feedback, but I don't actually have to take it. And I got to like weigh the cost, the cost benefit of whether I, take your feedback or not.
Right.
So all of those skills are built into everything that we do. And then, I think it is also just that constant having kids reflect on who am I, and what am I good at? What brings me joy?
Mhm.
Um, uh, our, I would say consistently, our students, as they get ready to make that next step towards post high school, they're just making much more thoughtful decisions. Their decisions aren't about, well, everybody goes to UW-Madison, so I want to go to UW-Madison. They're not about, well, this is where my parents went or where my parents want me to go. They're really thoughtfully thinking about, do I want to go to college? Is a technical school a better option for me? Would it be better to
Yeah.
do an apprenticeship? And would it be better to go to work right away? And none of those options is frowned upon in any way, shape, or form. Everyone is about, who are you? What do you thought? What are you thinking about? What do you need? Why are you choosing this? What does that institution, organization have for you? To really make those decisions much more thoughtfully. And we're practicing that all the time. And I guess probably the last thing I'd say to that is related to that: the process of creating their mastery transcript
Mhm.
requires them to do that, to say, this is who in one or two sentences, this is who I am. And then here's 3 or 4 pieces of my work that best represent who I am and what I'm
Nice.
passionate about. And that process of curating, like, this is who I am, is again such a, when you think of LinkedIn profiles,
Right.
that that matters in this world of, like, can you tell your own story? Can you
Yes.
accurately represent the best of yourself?
Yes.
And helping kids learn that skill is something that we're doing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You know, interesting, you know, as you talk through that, where I went was again our system. You know, in a way, we victimize our students, you know, in a way, and we're getting away from this, but we have a
Yeah,
hard time as educators trying to figure out, you know, how do we do this? Because to your point, taking feedback for some, that was you know, for some, a D or an F failing
yeah,
grade means what, redo or I failed.
yeah,
So, and to get people to accept the fact that, right, taking feedback is to help.
Yes.
is to iterate and make better and upskill, new skill, reskill kind of a concept versus you didn't cut it.
Yeah.
But it's very, very, very good stuff. Let me ask you this: is place-based education? You know, you guys do a ton of that. Is that what you're referring to, or is that also something a little different?
Yeah, I would say place-based is all of those pieces of
Yeah.
like, what is the, like that idea of open walls and taking the walls down, and what's the learning that's happening around you, and what's the, what's the history and the strengths and the beauties and all of the things right around us. I think that when I said before that idea that schools don't have schools are not the place you have to come to learn. I That one for me, as I really started unpacking that, I was like, yeah, we do act like that. Like
Mhm.
schools are where you come to learn. It's like, oh my gosh, no, you're learning all of the time.
Yeah.
And making that transparent for students and really making that a value add for students, to me, that's a huge part of in communities like Middleton, where we are, a majority white upper middle class population. Um, if we don't create the spaces for all of
Mhm.
our learners to bring in themselves and bring their community into our spaces, and if we're not honoring the many, communities around us, the amount of time it would take for our adult population to mirror our student population, like we don't have that much time to wait. Like the kids are with us now, and so the access to that culture, that history, all of those really deep rich learning environments that are outside of our school, like we've got to connect to that directly, because we can't wait for the adults to change over enough to be able to
Yeah.
represent that.
Yeah, you're identifying the heart of equity and access.
Yeah, yeah,
Because a lot of the times, as we talk about that in our school systems, we can't pivot off the fact that I think people think that's the other, those are other people or
yeah,
something, right? Equity access is about all of us.
yeah.
So yeah, you are just doing some great things there. All right, so I want to we got a little time left here. I want to talk, how do we do this, right? I mean, so you've created such a wonderful opportunity for students in such a great way. Um, it just really is an honor to talk about this with you and to know you. I'm going to tap into you even after I know I'm pretty sure the cat's out of the bag that you're retired
Yeah.
at the end of the year. As I'm sitting here, I'm going, Jill and I are going to work together. We are going to do some things together. I know it. So, anyways, but how do we shift this? How do we do this? How do we shift the mindsets in our larger school systems population there? So it's not just alternative education, great schools like Clark Street. How do we do this?
Yeah, yeah, and that's my passion, right? Like for me, that was one of my biggest pieces is I don't want to do this just for a small population of students. Like that to me is not the answer. The answer is we have to shift the system. And it's one of the, beauties of the position that I've been in is that I've also always had a foot in the traditional high
Mm.
school context. Um, and I can tell you, right, I thought it would be much easier and much faster because it seemed like such a good idea. But I am also really able to see what are some of the key things that schools and systems need to be doing. I think first and foremost at the high school level is that relationships really do matter, and
Yeah.
climate and culture really matters. And I think too often we're like, yeah, that's not, that's something they do at elementary school, or it's something they can do in extracurriculars. But in my classroom, like we're here to learn. And I just think that fundamental shift of we cannot ask learners to engage in productive struggle if they don't feel safe enough to do that. And so we've got to be creating communities, and every classroom teacher can do that within their classroom. That is something they
Yeah.
have control over. It's a mind shift of what is your role and how important that is. You talked with some of our people from the CAPS program
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Know them
those,
well.
those types of experiences, one of the things we've learned here in Middleton, right, is some students and families are willing to take a big leap and try something very different and come
Mm.
to a place like Clark Street. Most students and families are afraid of anything
Yeah.
that is that big. 14-year-olds are much more likely to just do what everyone else is doing
Yeah.
than to say like, oh, I'm going to be that one who stands out from the crowd. Like that's not something, those are unique kids and families that are ready to do that. But something like the CAPS network really starts helping all students have that
Yeah.
experience, that interdisciplinary, really practical, relevant learning experience. In the CAPS, program, obviously it's profession based, but I think anytime that it's a truly relevant learning experience that is interdisciplinary and really builds in all of those durable skills, as you talked about, I think the more we get opportunities for students to see those things and families to experience those things, I went down to talk to some of the students in the science lab, and being a former science teacher, I was talking to the teacher in the CAPS program, Melissa, the other day. I was like, what I loved most about their end of term presentations, every single one of them was getting up there and talking about how their project had failed.
Wow.
Every
Wow.
one of them, right? Let me
Yeah.
tell you all of the failures that I had and what I learned in that process. Because of
Wow.
course, right, these were kids who were taking on these science projects that were well beyond what they could actually do in a high school science lab, but they didn't know
Yeah.
that. And Melissa's job was to help create help them get connections, help them create the possibilities of what they could do. And out of that, they had amazing learning experiences.
Yeah.
And when we can help students and families start to see those, then I think it destigmatizes some of this, doing things very, very differently. And we can start getting, individuals to see it. I think the other big place, which I know you're passionate about, is our CTE departments, our career technical education departments.
Yeah.
They have the engaging curriculum.
Right.
They have the relevance, they have the context, and they've been doing this for years. We haven't always seen those as the best spaces to really help students develop their academic skills,
Right.
or even, right, some of these durable skills. And we have to tap into those places. Like we have to raise up those areas, because that's where kids are right now going to take some of those bigger risks, because they can see themselves in it. And then building more and more interdisciplinary connections amongst those. And I think the Carnegie Foundation has come out to say we've got to get rid of the
Yeah.
Carnegie unit. Like,
Yeah.
it's huge. It's
That's
huge,
huge. Yeah,
right?
it really
Like
is.
if we can start talking about how do we do this in a way that doesn't require a certain amount of seat time,
Yeah.
and we don't have to check all these boxes in a particular way, and we can start really thinking about it differently. I think really continuing to build those small scale things, build them up bigger, and getting organizations like the Carnegie Foundation in on it.
Yeah.
And the work Mastery Transcript has done to really bridge that connection between K-12 and higher ed. Obviously, nobody wants to do innovation in a way that's going to limit kids' options. So that
Right.
piece of really making sure that we're connecting with higher ed is critical as well. So I think there's a lot
Oh,
of really good work going on.
lots.
It's
Right.
pulling it together. It's keeping
Yes.
everybody moving in the same
Yeah.
direction. I think that's going to be key.
Yeah. Well, you just identified something for me and you to do when we retire here is we can go, right? We can go consult with the Carnegie Foundation and say, hey, we have the solution. We've lived it. We know what it looks like. Let's go.
And I think that's what I'm learning, right? Is there's
Yeah.
lots of people out there like us. There are lots and lots of
Oh,
people
yeah.
out there like
Yeah.
us, all over the country, all over the
Yeah.
world, doing this work, seeing the amazing results from students. So it really is about how do we continue to bring that work together? How do we get it to a broader audience? How do we start
Yeah.
introducing those that might be a little bit more skeptical, because the strategic compliance game has been really effective for them for what they wanted? Like,
Right.
how do we start, like we'll just how do we just continue to build that energy?
Yeah. I gotta give a shout out to even at our state level, Karen Smith and Beth Kaminsky. We were talking before we, started recording about your school was highlighted at the Wisconsin School Board Convention, and Karen Smith brought that to the presentation, and I think that that's just really cool. Beth Kaminsky is a huge supporter of that alternative school type vision, and those are key people at our state level that we need to have advocating for this type of work to be able to get it done. So I think we're in a really good spot. In our state, as we move forward, a lot of great things going on, and there are a lot of schools in our state that are doing some phenomenal stuff too. So, with that, I do want to ask, you're coming to an end of your journey. As we talked here just before, let the cat out of the bag that you're retiring. What I'll give you a second here to talk about what's been the best part of it. Maybe whether you include Clark Street, some of the other pieces, but what's been the best part of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there for me is any question about the fact that having the opportunity to have the experience that I've had to work with an amazing team of
Mm,
educators and community members to, everybody says, "Oh, let's build a school, let's open a school." Like we got to do it, and we were given permission by the district and given support by the district to really create something. And you know, philosophically, I believed that we could create a school that could serve all learners and that we could
yeah,
we could do it without grades, that we could help kids prepare for whatever they wanted to do next. Like I believed all those things, but we hadn't done it, and doing it was insanely hard work. We had a lot of things that worked in our favor that I think many places don't have, like many people, many places don't have so many of the things that we had that just fell in line,
mm,
right? So to be here, 13 years later, and to be feeling ready, like I feel like, yeah, we can hand this off to the next leader, and the community is going to continue. And
yeah,
and for me, being in a small democratic school, I am super close to students every day.
yeah,
I have never had to move away from students, and they inspire me
mm,
nonstop.
yeah,
Nonstop. Yeah, I was talking to a teacher today and he's like, like you come back here and you just can kind of step back into like, oh, this is a place where we're making a difference. And this is a place where things, we're taking care of each other, the adults, the students, everyone. We're learning from each other. We're
wow,
respecting our differences. Our young people are amazing. Um, if we create the conditions to let them be amazing. And I've
wow,
had the great fortune of being able to do that my entire career and really and stay close to it. And I think bring about some meaningful change. And that feels like an incredible blessing.
yeah, wow. That's really well said. It's funny when I came in and we met, it was what, August maybe, and God, I was just what you've created and what you have there as I'm driving home, right? Because I lived this many years ago, not to that level. I'm driving home going, I wonder if she has an opening. That's a place I'd really like to work, get back into it. But yeah, good for you. You should be proud of what you've all accomplished, and the impact that you've had on students is outstanding. So congrats. One
Thank
last final question here. I like to ask. We ask everybody, all of our guests. Our tagline is "Teach like it's 2045." So what do you think education is going to look like in 2045?
Uh, I hope, right? I hope what education looks like is that schools are hubs. Schools are hubs where we come together and we access the people and the resources that we need, and that learning is happening wherever it needs to be happening for all of our learners. Um, the when we in Middleton rebuilt this building, and there was conversations about, well, if the community keeps growing, we're going to outgrow it. I'm like, listen, if 20 years from now we still have all 2,500 of these kids, or at that point 35, coming together every day at the same time, we have
Yeah,
failed. We
yeah,
have
right.
failed.
Good point.
Like
Yes.
we need schools, we need connections, we need the adults and the students to come together and join that partnership to help build. We need resources, we need to put them all in one place, and we need to open up our doors and our walls and get kids out into the community, engaging in the amazing rich learning that's happening there. And we need our communities to be a part of the educational process. We've created some pretty significant divisions in some communities. Middleton's a pretty supportive community, but some communities have such divisions between their public schools and their community. And that's a tragedy. Like, this should be a community experience that we are doing together. And now the technology is making it so possible for us to make that happen for everyone. No learner should be, no student should be left out of that experience.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much for joining us. If people would want to get in touch with you before you do retire, how can they do that?
Well, you can contact me through at Clark Street. My email address is on our website. And yeah, we love to show off what we're doing and help people dream by coming to see it. So we're happy to have people come check it out. Yeah,
that's great. Thanks. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jill, and good luck as you ride off into the sunset. You've done some outstanding things for students and in education. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks again for joining us. And as we depart, remember, the future is clear. Take care, everybody.